Simona Cardwell has a rich history of experience in both insurance and child protection, which led her to work as Director of Risk Management for the Oregon Conference and her current position as Account Executive for Adventist Risk Management. Keeping our church and school facilities, family, and children safe is her top priority. Simona is married to a pastor and they have 3 beautiful adult children. They both keep busy with their own ministries within the church and enjoy being able to serve God in their community together. And Simona, I thank you for being here with us and sharing. I'm going to stop my share screen, and you're welcome if you have a presentation just to put that on. And also, Simona has provided her presentation. I will make that available to the participants later today. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I just want to confirm that everyone can see just the child protection screen and not my second screen that has my notes. Is that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. So I want to thank you all for having me here. Child protection is near and dear to my heart, and I have done so many of these presentations for the Oregon Conference, and I'm just so pleased that now as Adventist Risk Management, I get to share my passion with many other individuals in the church family, because saving our kids from a lifetime of trauma is such an important part of any ministry. Because as Caesar said and April, if we can save just one child from trauma, it stops a ripple effect that I think we can be proud to be a part of. Today, we're going to be covering child abuse in the church, some guidelines that we can put into place to protect children. Of course, nothing is perfect. We don't, and no place is safe, but we can do our part to make sure that our facilities are as safe as we can possibly make them. Some of what is going to be said today is probably going to be a little bit triggering for some. And I just want to remind you that if some of what is being said is difficult for you, take a break, walk away, then come back. And also, if you have a counselor and this is a difficult topic, I would encourage you to seek out your counselor this next week, just because I know that some of this information is hard to hear. So just keep that in mind as we move through these slides. I sometimes move kind of fast and I get very passionate. So please be understanding that this is something that is so important for our churches. We are a community of faith. And as a community of faith, we definitely have an obligation to keep our children safe. So I am from Adventist Risk Management, and this is my first presentation under ARM. And I'm just so pleased to be part of this organization that helps your ministry be as safe as can be, because our ministry is to help your ministry. And it's such a privilege to be able to work here. So we're going to be talking about your area of responsibility in keeping children safe. You represent an organization larger than yourself. It's not just your church in Nantucket or your church locally. You are part of a bigger organization. You're part of your conference. You're part of your union. You're part of your division. And as Caesar said with that story that Carolyn shared with him, all of those aspects play a role when somebody discloses abuse to us. They can feel like their conference let them down. They can feel like their pastor let them down. But they also, it goes all the way up as their church has let them down. And so as we're moving through this, think of this as bigger than just your local area. You are a part of something bigger. You are also responsible for those that are in your care, custody, and control. When a parent drops their children off with you, they expect certain things from you while you have their child in your care, custody, and control. They expect that their child is going to be returned to them in the same condition as they left them. And so part of this training is to help you learn how you can most safely do that. You also have a duty to protect. And so some of that is with supervision, the 2-person rule, the open door policy, which we'll get to later on. But all of those play into a duty to protect, even the criminal background checks that are required of our volunteers that work with children and our leaders in our church. That plays into this aspect of it as well. And in your leadership role, children look up to you. They look up to you and they have an expectation of you. And so it's really important in that you live up to their expectation of protection and not abusing your authority that you have over a child. And one of my favorite verses, I'm just going to put this in right here because it's so appropriate for our roles as leaders and as child protectors or even elder protectors, anybody that's in our care. And it's 1 Corinthians 16, verses 13 and 14. Be on guard. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Being on guard when it comes to protecting our kids, standing firm in faith. Part of our faith is protecting our children. Jesus was very firm about that. And be courageous, be strong, and do everything in love. That's so important for us to be courageous. And we're going to be talking about that, being strong when we have to report, but also doing everything in love. That is, if we are truly followers of Christ and we're a community of faith, everything we do is going to be done in love. Even when it comes to talking to the offender and maybe asking that person to not attend church anymore. We want to do it in love, regardless of their reaction to us. So as we move forward, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit already, it's more than a legal duty. We do have a legal duty. There are, in our different states, I don't know what that noise is, but in our different states, there are legal obligations of mandatory reporting. But as a moral compass, I would say that anybody, even if your state doesn't require it, if you are working with children in a community of faith, which we are, I believe you have a moral duty to protect those children, which is bigger than the legal state duty. But we will get to that. And here's Jesus's words: whosoever shall offend one of these little ones that believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he were cast into the sea. Mark 9:42. Jesus used some of the strongest language when he talked about his little children. And so should we then not have that same feeling. So as we move into this next segment of child abuse, I hope that you understand that as a leader, these are our children that we're trying to protect. Training is trying to give you the tools, and maybe you already have some of these tools. I know that April is very active in child protection, which go April. And so you probably already have some of these tools, but it's always a good reminder, as Caesar brought up with that story of 9/11, that when we practice these things, when we hear them over and over, they stay fresh in our minds, and which then when something happens, we can respond in a more calm, collected way, which is super important. So what is child abuse? Here's one definition. Child abuse is an act committed by a parent, caregiver, or other person in a position of trust, even though he or she may not care for the child on a daily basis. So a Sabbath school teacher, a youth leader, pastor, which is not accidental. So this is not an accidental occurrence in which harms or threatens to harm a child's physical, mental, or welfare. So child abuse can be far more than sexual. It can be emotional abuse. It can be neglect. It can be physical abuse. Today, we're going to be mostly talking about child sexual abuse, but these are all things that you can keep an eye open for, especially teachers and that are seeing the students more on a regular basis. It's very important that you're noticing their emotional behavior, you're noticing the physical markings on a child, if there are some. So people always ask, what are the trends in the church? What are claims that are happening within our organization? And I believe that these statistics are from 2020. So I think from 2000 to 2020, there was $30 million paid in sexual misconduct claims. And with Miracle Meadows, that's obviously going to be far more than that. So again, there's that legal aspect, because if we don't do our duty, it's going to cost the church. It's going to cost the church in more than just finances. But I don't know if you guys followed the Catholic Church lawsuit, but it can be pretty up there. And so we have the obligation, not just morally, but also legally. We had 168 cases over the past 10 years. The perpetrators are anybody, really. I mean, it could be an elder. Elder's not listed here, but I know of some elders that have abused. So child on child is actually on the rise, which child on child, at least in the state of Oregon, I don't know about other states, but it's 3 years difference. So if the child is 10 and the offender is 13, that would be even, and it can even go 18 or a 17-year-old, or even 18 and 3 years old, or 21. And also, I want to just say here too to the pastors, you know, you're in a position where you're in an authority position. And so there's also that that power over an individual. And so when you have power over an individual, it doesn't matter if you're the same age. If a woman, or even these days, if a man feels like they are sexually threatened by you, that could constitute abuse because of the power differential. So those are something to always be careful of when we're talking about abuse. And there was only 2 cases of stranger danger. And I think even the broader society will tell you stranger danger is not the bigger concern. The bigger concern is those you know, because sex offenders are very, very patient. And we will get to that in another slide. Abuse occurs in the church, and they're usually by a respected member, right? So when a child does get the courage to say something, a church will usually take sides, which is super sad because we aren't a community of faith. And it seems like what we would want to do is protect that child. But sometimes people move into the mode of trying to protect the offender. And the offender always has 100 excuses as to why that child is lying. And so the victim is not just victimized through the behavior of that individual, but they're continued to be victimized by the offender, by the rumors that they start with other people in the church. And sometimes the offender will just choose one person in the church and talking about how unfair it is. And that person they told will be their cheerleader and go around and talk to other members and start saying whatever that offender said, you know, like, oh, well, that kid's from a troubled home. They lie all the time. Didn't you see how they dressed? And start blaming victim blaming is what I call it. They start victim blaming, and it causes all this turmoil in the church. And as pastors, you really have a responsibility to stop that by, well, number one, I would encourage you to, if there is an accusation that person, that offender, accused, be asked to not attend until everything gets sorted out. And then when they do attend again, make sure that you have protocols in place that you are protecting the other children, even if you don't know if it's true or not. Because generally speaking, and we'll get to this in another slide too, I'm getting ahead of myself, but an offender will offend 120 people, 120 different individuals before they are caught legally for offending. So that statistic is really amazing to me. But again, we're going to get to that too. Kids just don't want to report because it's scary. They can be re-victimized. The statistics for females, usually 12 females are abused before they will report on one individual, and 30 boys generally are offended before one of those boys will turn in the offender. So it's super important that we realize that, yes, the person that's being accused is probably going to be somebody popular, somebody that other kids have liked in the past. And so it's going to put questions in everybody's mind. And so it's so important as leaders, as pastors, as teachers, that we take these seriously and stop those rumors and stop the victim blaming before it even starts. Sexual abuse occurs in all races, social economic classes, religious groups. Offenders like religious groups because we're grace oriented, we're love oriented, we're accepting. We're going to accept them and be forgiven. Even if they've been to prison, we're going to forgive them, or we're going to bring them in with open arms. But I will tell you, we can bring them in with participation agreements, with chaperones, with safety protocols in place. Grace and forgiveness and love do not mean, come on in, come to Pathfinders, lead our youth group. No. Love and grace says, we don't know your heart until we get to heaven. What we do know is that sex offenders have a problem that is just as horrible as alcoholism and narcotic drug abuse. And we would never take a sex offender or an alcoholic and set them in a bar every day, sitting there and asking them to not touch a drink. And it's the same with the sex offender. So we need to make sure that we have those safety protocols in place. And sometimes churches will vote to not even have sex offenders be attending their church. And that's okay too, because your church can decide that. But you should also reach out in love, minister to them in their home, let them know that they're not forgotten. We can do all those things while still protecting our kids. The average age of a victim is 8 to 11 years old, so it's quite young. Sexual abuse is, as I pointed out, it's rarely a one-time offense. Very, very rarely is it a one-time offense. 120 times before an offender is prosecuted in the legal system, because they're so good at turning the accusations away from them and victim blaming. So what do we do when a minor discloses? It is very difficult, as I touched on earlier, it's very difficult for a child to disclose this information because of all of these reasons that you're seeing on your screen. But I think one of the bigger things, not being believed and being victim. I mean, I don't know if if you saw the trial with the gymnastics coach, Nassar, I think his name was. But those girls that were victimized by him had to get up in the courtroom and face him again and say the things that happened. Most kids do not want to have to do that. And so they are doing better with that, because most child advocacy centers will videotape the intake of the disclosure, so that they can just use that videotape. And so that is getting better, but it's still a very difficult thing, because not being believed can be worse than the actual abuse itself. It can be more traumatizing to not being believed than the actual abuse itself. Corey Jill Jensen told me that, and I think April's used her before in your guys's conference, and she's fabulous. She's amazing. That is sobering to me, the thought that just not believing the child could be worse than the actual abuse itself. So what do we do when a minor discloses to us that this has happened? And what does that look like? Does it always look like, hey, my uncle, or the youth leader, or my Pathfinder counselor touched me inappropriately? Is it that clean? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Sometimes they will bring things up at different times to see if you're a safe person to disclose to. You have to have a relationship with these children for them to even want to disclose something that's happening to them. So building safe relationships is so important. And also listening to what they're really saying. Like, my mom told me that if somebody touched me, I should tell them no. And what do you think she would say if I didn't? Just little things like that aren't really getting to it, but are asking, are you a safe person? How are you going to respond to that? And just listening and waiting for them. Don't ever push a child to disclose to you, because that can taint the investigation if it goes to a legal investigation. So we always need to listen carefully. Listen carefully, be good listeners. That's so important. Be supportive. Don't overreact. I know as a parent, when my kids come in and say something to me, sometimes I'm like, what in the world? No, we have to, and don't start crying. Don't get over emotional. We need to just be calm and not ask leading questions. Just say, tell me more about that. How did that make you feel? Don't ask, well, who did it? Don't ever ask that, because and don't suggest people. Just listen, not asking leading questions. Repeating back to them is so good to make sure that you're really understanding it, writing it down so that you can have a report of it. Do not investigate. You are not an investigator, and it can taint the true investigation if this is criminal. So that is so important. And also, you only want to notify the proper parties. Who are the proper parties? Is the parent a proper party? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Because they might be part of the problem. Maybe it's a dad, maybe it's a mom, maybe it's an uncle. So you don't want to notify the family. You do want to notify the right authorities, and you do want to let your conference know that you are reporting something, and you want to let the pastor know, so that they can do due diligence in making sure that church is a safe place. You never want to promise that you're going to keep it a secret, because you can't. You cannot keep disclosure of child sexual abuse a secret. You always need to let them know. If they first come to you and say, I want to tell you something, will you promise not to tell? You can always say, I will promise not to tell anything that I'm not legally responsible to tell. But if you're going to tell me something that you are being harmed, or you're going to commit suicide and harm yourself, I'm going to have to tell people. So they do need to understand that you cannot keep it a secret. Also, don't promise that you can protect them from further abuse, because that's out of your hands. You can tell them that you will do everything possible, but that you cannot promise that, because you don't know if you call authorities, if they're going to take that child out of that home, if it's a parent that's abusing them. You don't know that. They might go into an investigation. They might do it that same day. They might do it in a week. You don't know. So you don't know if you're going to be able to fully protect that child. But you can reassure them that you're going to do everything in your power to help that child in that situation. So those are some very important things, and keeping it confidential, because this goes back to that that church splitting that can occur when a disclosure happens. And so that's why it's important to let your pastor know, and so that they can start that process, but also so that the pastor can stop rumors, go to those people and say, you don't know what's going on. You need to stop this. If this is something you can't stop, then maybe you shouldn't be attending church either. I mean, we really need to be firm with these people that are not backing the child, because the child needs to feel supported. And it's true, there are false accusations, but it is a very low percentage. Corey Jensen, I believe, says that it's 2 to 3% of all claims are false accusations, and they're generally with teenagers, but that not always the case. Sometimes it's just because of a misunderstanding. So you must report. They have a national child help hotline now. And so no matter what jurisdiction you're in, you can report with this number, and they will get it to the appropriate authorities in your region. So super important to write this number down. If you're in Connecticut, this is your number to call if you want to call your reporting specifically. And again, as I stated before, even if you're not a mandatory reporter, as a church leader, we do expect you to report, because you have a moral duty to report. Massachusetts, here's your number. Some states allow you to report online. I would encourage you that if you are making a report, that you ask the individual that you are making the report to send you an email confirmation of that report. And in my experience, they will do that, because if you are a mandatory reporter and there is a lawsuit in the years ahead, it is important to have proof that you did report it. And it's a good idea for you to keep it at the church level and also at the conference level, because it's the conference that's going to receive the lawsuit anyway. So what are some myths about child abusers? I'm sure that we all have the idea that we can spot a child abuser. It's that creepy guy. It's that, drug addict. It's homosexuals. And generally speaking, you cannot identify a child sexual abuser. There was a dentist's wife who was very attractive and just very beautiful woman. This was not in an Adventist church. It was just in a community. And she was molesting teen boys. And so you never know, because they are rich, they are poor, they are of all colors, they're of all religions, they're of all backgrounds. Again, Corey Jensen, statistically, they're not necessarily ones that were even abused prior. That's not a marker for if you are going to be an abuser yourself. The statistics are very low on that. So it's something that, who knows why? Who knows why? But you cannot identify a child sexual abuser. It's just don't set yourself up to think that you can recognize that you would, because they wear a sweater or because of how they look or because of where their background is from, does not mean anything. We'll get to the red flag behaviors, which are things that you can spot, things that you can look for. But it's not just because of these things. These are myths. So how does an offender pick a community? And I believe that these, Corey Chul Jensen, again, she and her husband had a sex offender treatment. She's now retired from that. She still does seminars, but they had a treatment place that the government, when they got released from prison, or even sometimes when they were in prison, they would do the treatment for these sex offenders. And so they got together and asked the sex offenders, like, how do you pick communities? What would have stopped you? What was your go-to? And so these are all things that were taken from that. Churches was a big one because, like I said, the forgiveness aspect of that. Youth pastors, Corey Chul worked with a youth pastor that had offended hundreds of boys because they believed him, because he was a youth pastor. He was in the church, he was dealing with low income boys, mostly, is who he had choose for his victims, because then he could easily say they were lying and things like that, troubled kids. It was very sad. Anyway, so they picked their communities that are going to be trusting, that don't have boundaries, that don't do background checks, that don't have safety protocols, that don't have limits on what abusers can and cannot do within the church. They look for all of those things in the community so that they know that they're safe to work in that community. They want communities that trust people. They want communities that let their kids run around and there doesn't seem to be anybody that's watching. Sex offenders, to me, are the best con artists there are, because they are patient, they know how to groom, and they know who to groom first. And it could be years. They could groom a family for 2 or 3 years before they even make their first move, because their move is to not hurt a child, but to abuse the child long term. So they are patient and they have all the right answers. They start by, many of them start by befriending the family. They get to be friends with the mom and dad. Sometimes they will have kids the same age. Sometimes they'll be single. But sometimes, like if it's in Pathfinders, they befriend the family, they start doing stuff together. They try to get into roles of authority, coaching, just try to get into places that children look up to for authority, that would give them, like musicians, where kids are like, wow, I want to learn to play the guitar or something. And so they start doing guitar lessons together. And of course, music lessons, always one-on-one, right? So we need to make sure that we're, as parents, protecting our kids and making sure safety protocols are in place for that, as well as other things. But they become friends. They treat the children older. Sometimes they will give the kid things like teenagers, they'll give them alcohol. And, of course, you're not going to tell your parent about that, right? So, but getting physical is a big one for even a red flag behavior, because they will wrestle and tickle, and then it's, oh, well, it was an accident. That's accidental touching, right? Sometimes they'll be, standing there and they will just put their arm, their hand on the child's shoulder just to see how the parent's going to react or how the kid's going to react. The kid kind of like, back rubbing. It's always important to get the child's permission before you ever touch a child. And we should never force our children to hug people they don't want to hug. Sometimes I did that with my kids, and I wish I could go back because I am so much more knowledgeable now about this stuff. But if I could go back, I would not make my children hug anybody. I would, if an adult, a family member even wanted a hug, I would say, do you want to give them a hug? And if they wanted to, yes. But if they didn't, I wouldn't force it, because kids have that internal gut feeling too that we need to be cognizant of. But all of these things, testing if a child will keep a secret, another huge one. Never tell a child to never keep a secret. They can keep surprises, because birthday surprises, presents at Christmas, all those things. We can keep surprises, but we never keep secrets. That's huge for offenders, to see if a child will keep a secret. And again, many children, the offender never has to tell them not to tell, because they feel ashamed, they feel guilty. Maybe their parent did tell them that they, don't let somebody touch you there. Tell me if they touch you there. And then it happens and they didn't tell their parent, and they're ashamed about it. And so then they don't know how to start that conversation. So the offenders are right there. Also, the offenders are really good at making sure they do not hurt the child physically with their sexual abuse. So those, again, they're patient. And so those are things that we need to be cognizant of when we're thinking about what the barriers children have for reporting this abuse. And so that's why, if we can spot the red flag behaviors, not accusing anybody that has these behaviors that they are offenders, but if we are a society of moral people, then following boundaries is not going to be an issue for us. Not wrestling with children is not going to be an issue for us. Not touching a child on their back when they don't want to be touched, and just saying, as a youth leader, you really shouldn't be touching that child. Little kids will want to run up to you and jump in your lap, but it's a good idea as the teacher to say, I really am so excited that you want to be here with me, but why don't you sit down here beside me? Also, getting down on a child's level so that when they come at you, because many of those little ones just want to come give you a hug, and you want to give that back to them, but you need to be on their level, because sometimes where their face is in an appropriate place for you. If they came up and hugged you, turn to the side. Side hugs are great too. So all those little things that offenders hope you don't notice are big. But if we have boundaries set up, it's not going to be a problem. It's not going to be a problem for us to go, you know what, I just saw that you went over that boundary. And then when we're in Sabbath school classes with these volunteers, if they know what the clear boundaries are, we can easily go up to them and say, I saw that you allowed this to happen. Make an effort to not let that happen again. And if they continue to happen, if they continue to go over these bounds, remove them from that volunteer position, because that just, they're testing you to see if you really are going to hold firm to those boundaries that you've set up for your volunteers and your leaders. So we've already talked about some of these dangers. So these are some of them. Appear hypersexual, preoccupied with child sexual development, flirty, accidentally touching private parts, which we already talked about. I was privy to a situation where an individual was super jealous of this teen and was calling the conference about the behavior of other people interacting with this teen. And that was a huge red flag. But we had nothing that we could actually use to report on it at that particular point, because it was just this one thing. But it did turn out that this individual was having a sexual relationship with that child. And it just devastated me, because I do everything I can to protect these kids. And then you have that situation happen. So again, we can't hold that guilt because we've done everything we can. But we definitely need to be cognizant that sometimes it can be just one thing, but we can't report when unless we have concrete evidence. Now, no, that's not true. I take that back. On suspicion, we can report. On suspicion, we can report. We don't have to have the full story. But sometimes when it's just one thing, we question it in our head and we're like, was it really? Is it really that? Because we're not seeing any of these other behaviors. And so that's a good idea when you have a situation like that, to talk it over with somebody else, and which I did, and we all came to that conclusion that this was not something that we would probably report. There's a lot of details I'm not sharing with you on that particular situation, but it can be one thing, and we just need to be very aware of these things, because these are super important. Gift giving is another one that lavishing them with gifts, taking them on plane rides. Maybe they have a really cool car and they take one person at a time on a ride. There's just so many things, and this is why it's hard. This is hard to spot a sex offender, because they are so crafty. They are so in tune with what's going to work at manipulation and with putting questions in people's minds about things, that it's hard, and it's hard to be the one to call and make that report. I've sat with many people as they call to make that report, and it is the hardest phone call, obviously, because they couldn't do it themselves. They came to us. And of course, you as a conference leader, as a pastor, be available to be with an individual, because in the state of Oregon, unless you were first party to the to even the suspicion, like you had to see the behavior that you were concerned about to be able to call and report. Otherwise, your report sat on the shelf for a while. So the reporter is the one that has firsthand knowledge. So you were the one reported to. You were the one that saw the behavior. And so I couldn't, just because I'm the third person that's hearing, the second person that's hearing the story, I couldn't call and report that. So I would sit there with the person that did hear the story. And as pastors and other leaders, I would pray that you would be the same, that you would be that person that would sit there with them while they're making that call, because it's very difficult to go. It's difficult to disclose, and then it's difficult to make that, especially when it's somebody that's popular. Maybe it is the pastor, maybe it is the youth leader, Pathfinder leader. It's somebody that is well liked in the church. It's hard to make that call. So again, it's important that we have these boundaries, that we have these protocols set up in our church, and we abide by them, and we call people out that don't. That's so important. And I think you've probably learned that I don't believe in reading the slides, because they're there for you to read, and you're going to get a copy of them. So another good one, working with children all day and then wanting to spend all your free time with children. That's a huge red flag behavior. Not always. I mean, there's lots of moms who spend all day with their kids, and then they're teaching in Create a Role and all of that. And 5 to 20% of all offenders are females. So I think that that's something that we need to keep in our minds as well, because sometimes we assume it's just going to be men and it's going to be girls that are offended, but there is a high percentage of boys. In fact, 3 out of 5 girls are offended and 6 out of 8 boys. So the statistics are there, and we shouldn't just be looking at men, because women are in this class as well of offender. And they're on the rise. And why is that? Probably because of pornography. More women are watching pornography today than they were several years ago. And female teens, it's like 50-50. So, all of that plays a role in children being abused, and the amount of abusers that are out there. Plus, We're all in our society today. And we know that the world is out to get our kids. And we as Christian institutions, as community of believers in Jesus Christ, we need to be an example to the world of protecting our children. So again, here, too good to be true, gifts for no reason, being friends with the family first. I heard a story of a pastor who hired a youth pastor, and that youth pastor abused his boys. And he wanted to be around the kids. The kids liked him because, again, he was patient. He befriended the family. Praise the Lord that when that boy disclosed, finally, they believed him. They removed him from his office. They did all the right things, and that helps so much our kids. So symptoms of child sexual abuse that you might be able to pick up: change in modesty, genital pain, itching, discharge, bleeding. While that might be there, not always, because again, the offenders are going to do a really good job of trying to keep pain from happening. Stomach aches, sleeping disturbances, wetting the bed, unexpected fears, clinginess. And again, not any one of these is a problem, but when you're seeing several of them, and sometimes it's the troubled kid. It is the one that's getting in trouble all the time. It is the one that you as a leader are going, man, this kid is driving me nuts. But you know, those kids that are the troublemakers, those kids that are dirty or whatever, are usually the ones that need more love and more attention and more compassion than the ones that are well-dressed, behaving well. Although that's not always the case either, because abuse can happen even with a kid that's straight A and has it all together seemingly. But those kids that are troubled and fire setting and abusing animals, what if we just took a little extra time with them? What if we befriended them and tried to get to know them a little bit better, tried to actually see inside their heart, tried to actually gain their trust? It would be huge, I think. We kind of already talked about this a little bit. Stranger danger is not a thing. Kids, there is an appropriate sexual curiosity, but you know, if you have a 6-year-old telling you about sex acts, that is not an appropriate sexual maturity for a 6-year-old. So definitely that is something to call out. Yeah, if a sex offender did this, guess what? They wouldn't. It just wouldn't happen. So the church manual tells us that we need to safeguard our children. So church should be a safe place, although I will say church, we should never say church is a safe place, because when we say that, then we stop looking and we just assume that everybody in there is safe. We want church to be a safe place, and that's why we have these protocols in place. Everyone involved with children who are minors must meet all the church and legal standards and requirements. In order to safeguard our children, churches are encouraged to adopt policies that will provide a measure of safety and protect the children. In fact, one of the trainings that I do, it says that you should have your code of conduct front and center in your church classrooms that have children, or maybe in the hallway, big print. If your church does not have a code of conduct, I know that the NAD does have a sample code of conduct that you can use to work off of. We also advise you that you get legal, that you have your state's legal look over it to make sure that it meets all the standards for your state. So we have the two adult rule. 2-adult rule. Yes, we know that some of our churches are small and there's only one person. It's hard to get one person in there, right? So that's where we have the open door policy, because if you have an open door, and you know, I also suggest having a deacon walking up and down. So that can be that second person, they're just there, just peeking in if you don't have that second person, in your classroom. There's other things you can do, but always that 2-person role. And I know there's always, Pathfinders or youth events where, you're the last person there with a child and you did not plan it. It just happened that way. What do? I suggest that you call the parent and you stay on cell phone with them, determining what you're going to do. And if the parent's not available, you call another church leader and you stay on the phone with somebody the entire time you're with that child, so that is your, they can be on speakerphone, so that can be your second person when these things that you do not plan end up happening. Of course, the volunteer screening, and April's going to be talking about that more. The North American Working Division does have a statement too that all volunteers 18 and older have the criminal background check done, and that they be voted. And every conference can have, as long as you are adhering to the working policy and the church manual, you can have stricter guidelines if you want in your conference. These are the minimums, and so keep that in mind. Of course, there's a 6-month policy. Why the 6-month policy? Because so many offenders, once, maybe the church over in Maine said, no, you can't come here, but they didn't report anything. So they decide to move and they go down to Massachusetts and they are, incredible. They want to get involved. They want to work with the kids. And you're like, yes, my church is so small. We've been waiting for somebody like you. And they don't do referencing. They don't call. They just put them into place. No, 6-month rule will give you time to just go, okay, who is this individual? Are they a good person? Are they not a good person? They claim they were. We all claim we're good people, but sometimes when we stop and we watch, then we can see if those other behaviors manifest themselves. It gives us time to get to know each other. And sometimes those person will get mad and they'll go to another church. And I'm here to say to you, if that's the case, fine. You didn't do anything to offend them. All you did was say, this is our policy and we're going to adhere to it. And that's so important because, again, they're trying to break that boundary. Now, do we have sometimes people who move in from another state? They've done the criminal background check with Sterling Volunteers in their other state, and they're coming in and they can transfer that background check. Some conferences say, okay, that's a different scenario. I don't know what your conference is, but you guys do. So I'll leave that to April. Training, again, we're doing that training, and I believe the NAD says every 3 years this training should happen. So now we're just going to kind of sum up the 7 steps to protecting our kids. Learn the facts, understand the potential risks. That's what we've done here today, helping you understand how a sex offender thinks, what things you can do to protect your child. Through these steps, we're minimizing opportunity. That's what we're doing by being trained and by having our set boundaries, our code of conduct with our volunteers. We're going to talk about it, because when we're talking about it, it makes it so that it's not in a vacuum. We're not triangulating anything. We're bringing it out into the open. We're being transparent about how we feel and how we're going to protect our children, and how we feel about abuse in churches. We're going to stay alert. And this is so important. Every church should have a child abuse prevention plan and be in communication with your conference about that child abuse prevention plan. And I know the NAD does have a help for that if you need it. You need to act on suspicion. If you see something, then my husband hates this term because he thinks I say it too much, but when you see something, say something. Even if it's you seeing somebody doing a boundary violation, say something to that individual. You're running around the foyer, or kids are running around the foyer, and you see a youth leader, maybe they're the ones chasing them, maybe they're the ones kind of wrestling, and say something to that person. You're like, in our church, we don't, we expect different behavior from our leadership. So please refrain from, and then move on, and then move on. It's when they continually not adhere to the boundaries is when there's a problem. But if we act on the suspicion, even if it's not to the point of calling authorities, it's just to stopping the boundary violation, that's something we need to be strong and courageous in that. We also need to get involved and become proactive in protecting our children. Don't stop with this training. I encourage you guys to look into some trainings in your state that are state specific. Sometimes you can call your child advocacy centers, and they will have trainings that you can attend and be involved in that way too. Make sure that as a leader in your community, in your community of faith, and with your children, get involved in this. Make it a priority to be the best trained you can be in this aspect. So what are some resources? Adventist Risk Management has a fabulous website that has guides and forms that you can, here is Child Protection Plan sample. See, they're all here on this website. They also have the Code of Conduct, I believe, on their website as well. They have solutions articles. They have, camp safety, all kinds of red flags, how to report. There's lots of resources here on their website. I would encourage you to look at it. In fact, for the pastors and safety officers, there is a training on their training platform, on Adventist Risk training platform, that you can go through that touches on setting up a safety plan and how to report and things like that. So I'd encourage, if you're a safety officer or a pastor, to go through that training. It's fabulous. If you want to subscribe to solutions articles, which are great because it covers the whole gamut of safety, fire safety, earthquake safety, slip, trips, falls, all sorts of things, we have you covered here with solutions. And I would encourage you to subscribe to that for getting those in your email inbox. We can make a difference. We can move those in our care that maybe have become victims to survivors. We have that ability to work with these children in a real way. And we need, at this level, to stop passing on people with bad behavior and to let that child know that they're worth more than just moving on the perpetrator and not having a safe environment. We can make a difference. We work together in our community of faith to make a difference for our kids. We are stronger that way, much stronger that way, when we support each other. So here's the references. For Jill Jensen, first one here, but there was a lot of material taken from other places